Hello and welcome to the Voice of Bold Business Radio. I am your host, Jessica Dewell of Red Direction. Today, we are talking about information. And you are listening to Program 26, Unusual and Reliable Information. Really, I probably should just rename it and call it Program 26, Unusual Information. And I have two great guys to explore the unusual with me, and we're going to meet them in just a minute. First, I want to talk to you and set the stage a bit. When we think about unusual information, we think about all the places that we know and we trust. And when we know and we trust something, we like it. We recognize it. There's a comfort level there. And the thing is, it becomes a vacuum. It becomes everything that we know and trust that is comfortable may be right, but it also can be very limiting as we're exploring new territory, as we find ourselves in new and different situations, and as we're bringing people from different backgrounds and different experience levels and different perspectives together. So how do we include information outside of our regular, typical, reliable resources and still make sure that it's accurate, trustworthy, and reliable when it's outside of our comfort zone? I mean, really what it comes down to is we're going to feel like it's weird. It's going to be weird, and it might be a little discomfort because we are stepping out. We are doing something different. Here's the other thing. It's what if we don't like the people that are providing us the information, even though it's trusted and credible by others? That's kind of a tricky thing to think about too, because then we get a chance to look at ourselves and acknowledge and bring it in for the good of the project, the good of the team, the good of the people development, and most importantly, the good of the modeling that we want, of the values that we want in our teams and the people that we want them to continue to become. So in the end, who cares? We care if our information is comfortable or uncomfortable. We care if it's reliable. And if we're not careful, we'll get in our own way. So right after this, I'm going to introduce you to Manny St. Victor and Tom Rhodes, and they're going to talk to me about unusual and reliable information.
Welcome to the Voice of Bold Business, the show that provides everything smart leaders need to evaluate situations, build relationships, and create solutions. Jessica Dewell candidly talks about the skills necessary to build tenacity and do more with less. And now, here's Jessica.
All right, welcome. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Voice of Bold Business Radio. As you know from my introduction, the introduction that you just listened to, and because I said it again, repetition never hurts. And what I can tell you about Manny and Tom is this. Manny St. Victor spent decades of his life ignoring his blind spots and weaknesses for fear that other people would see them and call them out publicly, which could include humiliation and shame for himself. He didn't realize that this comparison, this competition, this isolation mindset was the very place that he needed to access to reach his next level of success. He wasn't aware that being closed to himself actually meant keeping himself from his own self-love, but also the love of others that build and create a foundation for his personal journey and his professional one. Manny is on a mission of connecting self-care and self-love to personal and professional success. And Tom Rhodes has spent more than 40 years in sales and retail management. He started in a sales role with a textile converting company that sold to the athletic apparel industry. He didn't name any names, but we'll put whatever name we know in the athletic apparel industry of our choice in there. He is very involved in social media and the role that it plays in building relationships today. Okay, so I've got to know, what is multi-unit leadership?
Fancy name district manager or basic name district manager. So you oversee more than one location.
See, I was thinking like blocks, and they actually are, but they're physical places people go shopping at. So Manny and Tom, the question of the day: where do you go to find unusual and reliable information?
Google.
Google. And, I know. It's always right?
Yeah. And I'll tell you a funny thing about that. And I say that in all seriousness, especially now that when I get results from Google, I find that I can recognize the name of the person who either endorses or wrote the information. My initial background is from traditional medicine. I went to medical school. studied psychiatry. And so for a long time, if something wasn't empirically, mathematically, just overthought on paper, I wasn't able to internalize it. I just wasn't able to trust it because I had a bit of scientism, skepticism going. It's a neurotic perfectionism type of thing. As I switched careers because I wanted to go into entrepreneurship and felt the calling, in order to be able to make decisions and to act, I had to be able to take in information that wasn't an exact empirical statistical model and look at the person in front of me for the unique individual they are.
Turning everything on its head, really, is what that was. Okay. All right. Well, you gave us some good stuff here that I'll come back to. All right, Tom, how would you answer that question?
What I found over my career is that the best place to find honest, real information is from human resources people. They seem to know everything. And when I say human resources people, I'm not just talking about your HR manager, but talking about people like recruiters. I have a great connection with a person who writes resumes for retail managers. They seem to have a lot of honest, open information about what the industry is, and then the people within the industry. That's one place I go to. Google obviously is a source, but to me the biggest thing when you're actually in a leadership role within a business is how your connection is with your people themselves. They're going to give you honest feedback if you're willing to ask for it and take it. I was in a meeting several months ago, and it was interesting because the company talked about how they wanted to ensure that their managers were getting feedback. And what I found interesting was how uncomfortable the managers were with that concept. Since I've been doing it basically all my life that way, I didn't find it uncomfortable at all. But it was interesting that they felt like they were moving out of the box by having honest, open conversations and getting real feedback from their team members. Well, you really should be doing that all the time because they're going to tell you the truth. If they're unhappy, they're going to tell you they're unhappy. And then what's important is if you're doing that and if you're just a business of one and you're just talking to your customers, or you're a business of many and you have a number of associates, you have to be willing to take that open, honest feedback from the people you service. Because if you don't, you're never going to know. That's the most reliable source you can get, the person actually on the front lines. So you have to be able to do that.
Both of you guys mentioned Google, so we're going to start there. You know what I did when I started this show? I was doing the research and trying to put together an introduction that I liked. So I went to Google and I typed unusual and reliable information. And you know what came back? The Farmer's Almanac, the anti-Wikipedia page, the top list of the most unusual Wikipedia pages, and a whole bunch of other things that were related to UFOs and conspiracy theories and stuff like that. I want to start with Google because this ties into where I want to go that touched on both of your questions is when we use Google, how much is our ability to know what we're looking for matter when we're doing Google searches?
I think it's super important because the first part of my looking process is defining what I'm looking for, because then it determines who is an expert in it. Because when I get my results, I'm not going to go to the first UFO page I see. I want to go, I'm going to check if the person lives near Area 51 or, just to see how dedicated they are to whatever they're typing. The first example that comes to mind is someone who I met online is David Amer. Mm-hmm. And over the years, I got to see where he was thinking. What that allows me to do is, after digging into the deep data dive and seeing his background, when he says stuff that feels a little more abstract and has more of a leap of faith aspect to it, I feel more confident with that. Until I've clearly defined my problem, I don't know who I want to hear from.
Okay, Tom, what would you add to that?
Much like a reporter, you want to find a number of different sources on whatever the subject is. You can't just take the first Google hit and go with it, especially if it's a topic where there's opinions involved and data involved. You've got to make sure that you have several different ideas, several different thoughts. As you do that, you'll develop trust in a certain group of people or a certain author or a certain manager or whatever the case may be. But Don't go with the first one. I wouldn't even go necessarily with the second one. Find 2 or 3, 4 sources that you can read, get ideas, get different thoughts. That'll help you learn, help you kind of create the path you want to go on. You build trust and reliability in those sources. You find somebody who's totally off in left field, and that may not be the direction you want to go next time. You want to go to another source, but always have more than one thought. That's why I love social media so much, because I can read 15 blogs in a day on similar subjects and get 15 different ideas. You find that some people, you're going to read them over and over again, and sometimes you're not going to read that person. You're going to move on to something else.
So we've got the define the problem from Manny. We've got have more than one thought. So we have a well-rounded idea. And I was coming at this from when I use Google, I usually don't know what I don't know. So I type in what's logical in my brain and like unusual and reliable information. I expected a whole different set of results. So I landed smack dab in the center of, I don't know what I don't know because I can't even find the information I want around this topic that I'm building. And you know, sometimes that's frustrating. And if anybody that is out there that's like me that doesn't necessarily, they use data and they collect information and get ideas to define the problem, that in today's world of access to so much information is really difficult. Because I have to tell you, as cool as the internet is and as amazing as social media actually is, I still have books that I have at hand. I have piles and piles of books, and they have notes on the front, and they have notes on the inside, and they have notes everywhere else. In a world of fast-paced information, how can you trust something that's so short and in passing? And when we've got stuff coming at us like a fire hose, and so people, now not all people that write books really should be writing books. I'm going to just put that disclaimer right out there. But when you find somebody that you're interested in, or it shares a passion, and they've taken the time to distill all their information into something that might be useful, that we end up crossing that path a lot, it's kind of a cool way to expand outside of what we know. So looking out to get new information, which takes us to this concept of feedback loops. And really all the information that we need to define the actual problems that are going on is usually right in front of us.
You're always concerned about giving feedback to your boss. What I've always tried to do is open the door by asking a lot of questions. I might sit down with a manager and never make a statement for 2 hours. I'm just going to ask them questions. I'm just going to ask for feedback. I'm just going to ask open-ended questions that they can talk about and try and create that trust and that comfort that I'm not firing you for answering honestly here. We're going to work together to find a resolution to whatever the situation might be. But the best way I can do that is to ask you questions. At the same time, they learn a lot because they have to answer the question. If I sit and I tell them a series of things, then I'm just telling them a series of things. They're not learning anything really. If I ask them a lot of questions, they become more comfortable. I make sure that I listen to understand. I try to, maybe that will create another question or another 4 questions. Whatever it could be. But you've got to build that feedback loop as you talk about. And I always try to start by asking questions and holding myself accountable if I've made a mistake, or if they say something, say, yeah, hey, yep, I messed up. That's my mistake. Let's talk about this. How can I do that better? Whatever the case may be. So I think you have to build that trust. My dad taught me a long time ago, as a matter of fact, he even reminded me the night before he passed away, that people don't work for you, they work with you. And as long as you create that environment on a consistent basis, then you'll get great feedback from people.
What would you add to that, Manny?
I would add that the feedback loop is super important. Like Tom said, the internal aspect of it, because, I'm a neuro geek. One of the most important things to do is to learn how to respond to feedback and how to kind of understand the structure of feedback. Because what I found a lot when I'm working with my clients is sometimes the feedback triggers memories or things from their past, and then the conversation no longer becomes about what we're talking about, but about what was triggered. it's not what I meant, intended, or said, but what the recipient inferred. I find that taking the time to understand how I process feedback, what became important for me and what I tend to model is realizing first response to feedback inevitably is an emotional response. But to kind of be aware of that emotional response and then move towards a shared goal from there, to listen for the feedback. Not everyone knows how to give constructive, productive feedback. Sometimes it's just criticism, less constructive. But to be able to hear, okay, is this someone I trust enough to see that they have the same model in mind as me? Do they have the same intention, the same desired outcome as me? And did they really see what I just did, including what I intended to do, what I'm trying to accomplish? And is their feedback in a position to help me get closer to my goal?
I think the environment you're asking for the feedback in is very important. In the retail industry, especially in a big, what we call a big box, like a Walmart or Toys R Us or something like that, if you go out into the store and you manage by walking around, or I like to call it better, lead by walking around, and you just have general conversations with associates within there, get feedback on what's happening in their day and what's important to them, that's a totally different conversation than if you bring them to an office, or it's a totally different environment. And as soon as you ask them to come to the office, the defensive wall already goes up. So if you can have those conversations and get that feedback in an environment where the associate or the other person is comfortable, then you're always going to get better answers.
Evaluating existing feedback loops or building new feedback loops. What would be your top 3 tips for what to keep in mind?
Well, for me, it would be to make sure that the person you're working with understands that their feedback matters. Make sure you're creating an environment in which the person is willing to give the feedback and is not on the defensive. Third thing is hold yourself accountable for whatever is being given back to you and feedback on you. That builds trust. If you're willing to say, I made a mistake, I'm accountable for what I did wrong in this situation, then you're going to build that bridge you need to have a great relationship and communications with your people.
For those of you listening and or watching us, we are the Voice of Bold Business Radio program 26 today, where we're talking about unusual and reliable information. And what we've been talking about so far was, where do we go for it? Who do we know? What can we find as open and honest? And then we dove into this concept of feedback loops. If we're accountable for the feedback we get, we're creating the environment, we're asking for it, and we want to make sure that people know that their feedback actually matters. What does that look like to each of you?
One of the challenges I faced at one point in time was going from kind of being leader or manager in one location to one day having 13 locations. How do you lead by walking around when your 13 locations are hundreds of miles apart? That's where consistency has to come in. That's where you have to, as Manny mentioned, got to treat everybody the same. Guy in store A is not any different than guy in store T, or whatever the case may be. You have to continue to communicate. I had to drive a lot between locations. I was on the phone a lot. How you doing? What's your day look like? Everything going okay? You got any questions for me? That's it. Just because it makes them realize that you're still there, you're still in touch. You're not going to be face-to-face that day because you have 13 stores 100 miles apart. You're not getting there every day. The ability to reach out and touch them in some way, shape, or form is vital to leading by driving around instead of leading by walking around. Hey, if I know one of my managers' child is sick, I may just call and say, hey, how's your son doing today?
Right.
Might not have anything to do with business. Doesn't necessarily always have to do with business. It may just be, how's that person doing? Am I comfortable that their mind is where it's supposed to, or, it's going to be on business, although it probably should be on their son?
That helps you be a better manager. And maybe it's not the time for development. Maybe it's the time for, I don't like to use the word risk management, but that's really what it is. Helping support them get through their place without having a negative detriment to that manager whose mind is elsewhere. So concept of teamwork and building a team, and that trust really comes in.
Makes you and them human. And it's still a human business.
Seems like we've forgotten what this human interaction looks like. So what's your take on that? And how do you use social media as a tool for communication instead of the actual act of communication?
what I've found is that the more I get to know my audience and making an effort to pull back the history that I have with that person, what initial situation led to us meeting, what interactions have we had in the past, what are they interested in, what are their goals and desired outcomes, so that when they respond on social media to a general statement that I made, that gives me more info about them, but it also gives me an opportunity to jump back into a conversation with them at a deeper level. It's not just about the status that I put up. It's about what I know about the person, with the additional fact that that status hits them where they are at the time.
If you can make it where the connection becomes face-to-face, even if it's over a computer, you can build that relationship even further, and you can have more in-depth conversations, because not everything can be done in 140 characters. So
we were talking a lot about this connection. We're talking about how we touch base. And one of the things that we were talking about in a work setting was being able to give feedback as well as receive feedback. So this is going to be a two-parter. We'll start with part one, which is, when do you recognize the need for feedback? That's my first question. How do you know? How do you know some feedback is necessary? And I guess, when would you give it? Maybe not the how, but the when. When would you give it?
When stuff goes off the rails, or when you see a sign that, from your own experience, indicates that stuff is about to go off the rails and you could possibly prevent it by informing the team. Or if you can't prevent it, you can do a subliminal "I told you so," but not like the jeering type. You know, you know what I mean? Because it's like,
subtle "I told you so," everybody. I think that needs to be on a T-shirt. It just needs to say subtly.
No, but you know what I mean? It's like, you walk up and you're like, you know, and this works well with my son, where I'm like, hey, this is one of those cases where you're going to be able to make a choice, mainly because I won't be there when you do it. But if you do it and this happens, that's indicative that, you know, that's not really headed towards your desired outcome. Okay, go have fun, carry on. And, you know, and then later on he'll come back, he'll be like, the situation came up. It was really tempting to do the thing that you told me not to do, so I did it. Precisely what you told me might happen if I did it happened, so you were right. I don't say "I told you so." I'm just like, well, good. What about next time? Like, I might do the same wrong thing again a couple times, but each time I'll notice the "I told you so" moment. My work is done here. You know?
There you go.
I look for a change in behavior. Is a person just acting totally different than you normally see them on a day-to-day basis? It may be nothing. It may be something that's totally outside the business, is kind of seeping into their attitude for the day at the business. Mm-hmm. But if you see it, if you see them acting in their behaviors being just totally different, their attitude, the way they speak, they talk to you, the way they talk to a customer, the way they talk to other associates, that's just totally different, then that tells me it's time to start asking some questions about what might be happening in their world that's affecting what they're doing.
And then that goes into the second part. So noticing is one thing, then the how. So Manny, you gave us a little bit of the example of the how, of interacting and walking through a situation with somebody to show them when and how certain things might come up. So Tom, how would you then take what you're noticing and turn it into feedback for the person that you're noticing this behavior change?
Well, the first thing I'd do is try to determine what may be causing the situation in the first place. Yeah. Okay, because that may determine what kind of feedback there is involved. Okay, mm-hmm. It may be, like I said, it may just be, hey, really had a tough ride in, had a flat tire, I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to pay for it, something like that. Mm-hmm. And then it's just kind of, okay, you listen and you kind of give them some, as much positive as you can, that, hey, it's going to be okay. You want to talk about it after work, you want to talk about it at a time, but right now, I need you to focus on this, and then we can have a conversation when it's a little bit more appropriate. If it's something that's, you just lost it on a customer, right? That's not cool. Then it's maybe a more private feedback where we're having a little question about, I've actually asked associates before, do you think that this is the right job for you based on how you acted in that situation? And
what do they say? I'm curious. Do they say, yeah, no, it's not? And then they tell you why they're there? Or is it, it is, And so you're able to help them change and improve.
Both situations. I've actually had a person tell me, I've just been thinking about this, and this really isn't the best role for me. And my answer basically is then, okay, so how can we work to find you a better opportunity? I'd be more than happy to find you an opportunity someplace you're going to be happier. And I've had situations where it says, yeah, I know I lost it. This is just, I'm struggling with this right now. Be in a Walmart on a Black Friday and find an associate not struggling. Okay. Okay.
Exactly. Or in an airport at a snowstorm at
Sure.
your holiday.
Exactly.
Concept, right?
You try to move it into a teaching moment, a development moment. How can you help them handle that situation better? It's a big company like a Walmart, maybe it's a different role. Within the same company, you don't lose this person with potential, or maybe just a role that's not in the company and you're just going to help them find
Right.
Well, I know this person at this place that's hiring, and I know this, that may fit better for what you're looking for, or whatever the case may be.
The last thing before we wrap up today's show, I'm curious if you would each share a story of a time that you received feedback, and it's going to be memorable because you're able to recall it to share here, and what the impact was both maybe in the moment as well as looking back on it a little bit later.
And it wasn't a positive feedback.
Okay.
Basically, I was told at one point in time in my career that I would never be successful because I cared about my people. Okay. And
interesting feedback. Yes.
Yeah. So this was basically a person who was primarily business. Business. That's all that mattered was business. And it was a person who felt that his success was more important than the success of the people who worked for him. Basically, it shaped me in a way that pretty much went opposite from his advice, that I was only going to be successful if people I worked with were successful, and that it became my role more as a servant leader at that point in time than even I had been up to then. I never quite figured out how that was a bad thing. So, you know what I'm saying?
I hear a very big value disconnect.
Yeah.
The feedback you got, he saw you in his world versus the feedback you got in his understanding of your world. And that, I think, is illustrated in a lot of the answers that you were saying is to close that gap too. So you went the opposite direction.
I was taught a certain way by my parents, and that's kind of what I built my leadership or my parenting on and everything. And like a lot of people do, I'm sure. And he challenged that. So I just became more enforced by it instead of losing it, I guess.
So that feedback actually helped you find your passion, something that you are super passionate about that makes you, and how you show up and model for other people.
Kind of somewhat owning it, to totally owning it.
Nice. Yes, you stepped in.
When he said that the first time, I was kind of in shock, and then I kind of woke up the next morning going, okay, he just totally complimented me in a kind of strange way.
That's right, yeah. Yeah, that is. How about you, Manny?
Well, Tom brought up a story similar that had me questioning my values, because when I was in med school, one of the most painful pieces of feedback that I got was that I was spending too much time talking. And I was like, really? You mean the people in pain that come in here, and often it's because they want someone to hear that they're in pain, and that's how they're measuring their satisfaction, not by the pills we're giving them? About a decade or so later, during my psychiatry residency, one of my attendings, I guess I had over-responded to the feedback, because one of my attendings was like, it's not about the execution, it's about your attitude while you're doing it. Because as a result of just how I felt, and I was getting the feedback that I was listening too much to the patients, I moved to a field where we want to listen to the patients more. Psychiatry is very much about listening to the patient. But at the same time, I applied the change. I became less of a listener. So it's ironic that I kind of came full circle in those two pieces of feedback.
Interesting. This is so funny because I expected this to be way more detail-oriented, math-oriented, checklist-oriented. And as usual, I'm always surprised with the fact that everything that we do in this world, and I am truly surprised by this, and I get tickled by it, that there's more than the checklist. There's more than just the way to do things. It's the experience that we bring. It's what we're sharing to the world. So whether we're talking and starting about Google, or we're talking about feedback loops, or we're talking about how we are accountable in the feedback that we're given, and how we then are shaping other people by the feedback we give, and how we're influenced, as Manny and Tom's stories both shared, by the feedback that we get, and how we use that for our self-awareness, is what comes down to, is it unusual and is it reliable? And everybody, you can find show notes. I will take notes about this entire conversation. We will put it all on thevoiceofboldbusiness.com under unusual and reliable information, or just go to voiceofboldbusiness.com/p26 and it will all be there. So we are so glad that you spent this time with us, and being a leader in today's world is more than just showing up and doing your job and living your life. It's talking to other leaders, just like Manny, just like Tom. So keep this conversation going. Where do you get unusual and reliable information? And how do you use your awareness to sift through that and make it more support what you're doing? Whether that's because it's an exact opposition and you're digging your feet in and going, this is the way that I am and I know it and I'm going to own it. Or on the other side of, I guess I never really thought about that, and I swung too far in the other direction, and I do have more work to do myself also to be the model that we want to be. So tell us what you do to step outside of what you know and to gain differing opinions with the information that you give and you use. Until next time, thank you.
Subscribe at thevoiceofboldbusiness.com and get more information, program notes, and past episodes. Bold leaders approach each situation and focus on action to achieve a higher level of leadership. Jessica Dewell, your business advocate, is the host of the Voice of Bold Business Radio. Thank you for joining us.